So if you go to dinner down there, you will get, we can get 10% or 15% of your meal ticket. Well, they'll donate it to us.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a pretty good deal.
Yes.
Well,
So,
thanks for sharing that, Lynn. I think we should go ahead and get started.
okay.
So, welcome everybody today. I'm Kim Laney. I'm your OLLI coordinator, and I want to thank you for being at our first brown bag presentation of our fall term. You can see that I have closed captioning turned on, and if you don't want to have that turned on, you can turn it off on your own device by navigating down to the closed caption icon and turning it off. I also wanted to let you know that the OLLI office is now open. We are here from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily to answer any questions or to help you get registered for classes. A quick reminder that it's also time to join or renew your OLLI membership for the fiscal year 2021-22 if you haven't already. And membership begins each year on July 1st and runs through June 30th. We hope you will join us this year and help us to reach our goal of at least 7,000 new and returning members. Today's brown bag presentation is made possible by the Friends of OLLI, and friends are anybody who gives a donation to help support our programming. We are happy to have these gifts and make these community presentations available to all of you. Following today's presentation, you will be able to link to the recording on our website. And so I just wanted to give you the information about how to access that. It's on our archive page. And if you haven't been to other brown bag presentations, you can find the complete list on our website. I also wanted to remind you that our classes start next Monday, September 20th. And we have staff right now busy processing registrations that have come in over the weekend. If you sign up, it is helpful if you do it early so that we can get you your link to your class in a timely way. And catalogs are available around the community in places like Wildberries, coffee shops, libraries, and so on. You can also find the schedule of all the classes on our website. And I just wanted to make sure that you all know that we do have a calendar on our website too. And you can navigate to it by going to the calendar link right here. And then you can find the classes and look to see when they will be offered. Quickly, before we get started, I wanted to let you know that AARP has contacted us and they're looking for people who may have retired to this community, and OLLI was a factor in that decision. So if you are that person or you know somebody who moved here because of our program, let me know. If you can send me a chat or you can send me an email or even call me, that would be great. My number is 826-5880. Thanks. We're just about ready to get started. You did come in muted and you do have the ability to unmute yourself. So you can do that if you have a question. And Tuck has, he's our facilitator today, and he is requested that if you have questions during the presentation that you go ahead and ask them in real time. So if there's something that comes up, you can either raise your hand, you can use the raise your hand function, and if you put it in the chat, we'll go ahead and get that question brought forward. Thank you again for being here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jane so that she can introduce our guest today.
And welcome to our moderator, Tuck Engelmann, who has retired to Trinidad after teaching high school science and coaching soccer in Southern California. Didn't say where. He spends his free time exploring the outdoors of the North Coast and spoiling his dog. I know what it's like to spoil a dog. We have a very spoiled dog. So welcome, Tuck, and I know you're going to introduce our other members of your group.
Yes, I am. Hang on just a second. So thank you for having us. I apologize if it looks like I'm in a dungeon, but that's the nickname for this room. I would be doing this from home, but I don't trust our internet service. So this is why you're seeing me in the dark, which is probably one of the best ways to see me. Quickly, we're going to introduce ourselves. I'm going to show you a quick video, and you're going to meet some of our juries. We'll show you our website and how to navigate it, how to do some simple functions. And then we'll have a question and answer period at the end. So, John, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is John Heckel, and I was on the Humboldt County Civil Grand Jury for 2 years, some 6 or 7 years ago. The second year, I was asked to be the foreperson of the grand jury, and it was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And as it turned out, it was one of the really remarkable experiences of my life, being on the grand jury. Thank you.
Vicki.
Hi, so I'm Vicki, and I had a business in Arcata for 46 years. It was called Bubbles. Some of you may know me. And I retired in 2019 and sold the business to a long-term employee. I actually grew up here. I moved here when I was 8, and I graduated from Eureka High. Go Loggers. And I am on the current grand jury, and this is my first time.
Steph.
Yep, I'm Stephanie Boers, and my husband and I moved here 26 years ago from the Bay Area to raise our family. I have a marketing background, and I've worked in high tech. I've worked in healthcare and financial services. I'm recently retired, and like many of you probably, I've spent the past 1.5 years working in my garden, solo hiking, reading, and staying up to date with friends and family via Zoom. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to get to travel again.
And again, I'm Tuck Engelmann. My wife and I, hello Susan, live in Trinidad. We bought a small cabin about 25 years ago and added a home to it. We're both retired teachers. My wife's on the Trinidad School Board. So if you have any complaints, get a hold of her. So I promised you a video. So here we go.
Oops, somebody has a question, Tuck.
Oh, yes.
Lily, you need to unmute yourself.
Wilhelmina?
Oh, there.
There.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I would like to make my contribution here to the program by saying I was on the grand jury from 96 to 97. And I met my husband on the very first day of the grand jury on July 2nd, 1996. So that's another little side effect of being on the grand jury I thought you might like to know about. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, we'll put that in the brochure, actually.
Okay, good. Bye.
Hey, Tuck, before you share your video, did you make sure to share the sound?
What's down?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking to Tuck.
The
Oh.
share sound.
Yeah, when you go to share the video, there's a little place where it says share sound. So you might
Okay.
need to back out and go back in again.
Okay.
Let's see how we do.
Okay.
Oops. Let's see here. Technical difficulties.
That happens. We'll get it right. We'll get it going here.
Okay. You know what? Why don't we continue with the interview of John, and we'll get back to that. So let me share again. Maybe. There we go. So John, when did you serve on the grand jury?
When did I serve on the grand jury? I served on the grand jury in 2014, 2015, 2016. And as part of the introduction, the first year, I got one of those notices in the mail. We in Humboldt County, we don't do such a good job getting a lot of people to volunteer to be on the civil grand jury. So oftentimes the judge sends out notices in the mail requesting people. And I got one of those notices in the mail and I thought to myself, this is a way that I can give back. I've lived in Humboldt County for almost 50 years. This is a way that I can give back to the community, that I can learn a great deal. So I filled out the form and then I was chosen to be on the grand jury, and it was a remarkable experience. And then the second year, the judge asked me if I would be the foreperson of the grand jury, and it was an opportunity that I couldn't refuse.
I think you just answered our next question here.
Oh. What's the next question, Tuck?
What roles did you have?
What roles did each grand jury, the remarkable thing about the grand jury system is that each grand jury each year is autonomous from the previous grand jury and autonomous from the next grand jury. So each grand jury can decide on the roles, the officers, committee heads, the structure. So each grand jury creates its own structure. The only person who is chosen by someone else is the foreperson, and the current presiding judge chooses the foreperson of the grand jury, and then all the other roles are chosen by that year's grand jury. And in the first year, I was parliamentarian of the grand jury, and I was committee heads of one committee. I can't remember exactly which one. And then like the second year, the judge asked if I would serve as the foreperson of the grand jury.
All right, thank you. So which one did you prefer?
Which one did I prefer? It's not a matter of preference, I guess. I'm a retired professor from the university, so I worked at the university for some 40 years and then went back to school and got a PhD in psychology. So the psychology work allowed me to draw on some of that experience in terms of being the foreperson of the grand jury, because the way that the civil grand jury is structured, you have 19 people who all have equal authority under the concept, the structural concept of collegiality. Everybody has an equal vote. There is no person who has more authority than any other person. So I guess attempting the role of foreperson, of facilitator, of providing some leadership to the group, asked me and called on some of the training that I had and some of the work, both as department chair at the university and the degree in psychology. So I guess I found that really very, very rewarding. And I also enjoy research. And one of the things about grand jury work is the incredible amount of research that the grand jury does. So I really enjoyed the role of researcher and writing and formulating findings and recommendations, that kind of work, Tuck.
And you're still involved in the grand jury, aren't you?
Yes, after serving on the grand jury, I was asked to participate in the statewide training program. And for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been a statewide California Grand Jury Association trainer and have gone around to the various counties and helped train their grand juries.
All right. So how would you describe your time on the grand jury?
One of the most remarkable experiences of my life. One of the difficulties we have is trying to communicate that to people, that this really is a truly remarkable experience. To commit yourself for 1 full year to meet with 18 other people and investigate and look at and research various areas of Humboldt County government, and then to find what works and what doesn't work, and then further to research recommendations on how various parts of our government can work better, is truly a remarkable experience. And it's difficult to get people to become aware of that. It's difficult to encourage people in the county to volunteer to be on the grand jury, but truly it's one of the more remarkable experiences of my life.
So 2 thumbs up then?
If I had, no, 2 thumbs and 2 toes. You can't see my feet, but both of the toes on my feet right now are pointing up.
That's awesome. So where does the grand jury get their impetus to investigate something?
Each grand jury, like I said earlier, each grand jury is autonomous from previous grand juries. So a lot of times, grand juries receive complaints from the community, and members of the community can go on the grand jury website, the county website. They can access the complaint form, and they can send a complaint into the grand jury about some aspect of county governments. So oftentimes these complaints lead to full investigations and reports. So in the past, in my experience, for instance, we did in 1 year, I can't remember whether it was 2015, 2016, we did a major report on the county's ADA compliance with the federal government. And that was based on a complaint that was filed with us. That got it started. Oftentimes, it's the interests and the passion that the members on the grand jury, these 19 people are active citizens in the county. They have opinions, they have feelings about what works and what doesn't work. So that often leads to an investigation. Oftentimes, articles in the newspapers lead to investigations. Sometimes the previous grand jury might forward a file to the current grand jury, and they may decide to follow up on that. That can lead to investigations. The penal code says that every county must investigate and report on one aspect of county government each year. So the penal code only requires the civil grand jury to look into one aspect of county government and report on that each year. So one report is required by the penal code, and the penal code also suggests that the grand jury needs to look into any state prisons that are in the county. And there's some disagreement about whether or not, for instance, our county correctional facility falls under the guidelines of being a state prison. It's a county jail, but oftentimes the grand jury takes a tour and looks at making sure that our county correctional facility is functioning properly.
You ever have a friend come up to you and say, hey, you should look into this?
Absolutely. The fact of who the 19 people are that are on the civil grand jury, that's public record. Everything they do is protected by confidentiality. They can't reveal anything that goes on in the grand jury room, how anybody voted, what they discussed, or right now what they're investigating. They can't reveal any of that information, but it is public record who is on the grand jury. So if the public knows that somebody's on the grand jury, for instance, when I was on the grand jury, I had friends who came up and said, listen, why don't you investigate so-and-so? And my response would always be to politely listen. And then I would suggest, why don't you go to the website and fill out a complaint form and take those thoughts and put them into writing and file them with the grand jury. So that's the best practice, is to listen and take the information in, but then suggest maybe that people fill out the complaint form and file a complaint.
Thank you. So now you know what you want to investigate. What happens next?
What happens next? Usually, again, remember that each grand jury is autonomous to every other grand jury. So for instance, the grand jury that Stephanie's on right now, they decide how to manage, how to structure, and how to organize their grand jury. They may take guidance from how past grand juries were structured, but they're autonomous, they're unique in and of itself. So they need to decide how to advance investigations. But there are some guidelines that the penal code suggests. For instance, the penal code suggests that it takes a supermajority vote of the grand jury as a whole to proceed with an investigation. And that means that 12 out of the 19 grand jury members need to agree that an investigation is worth doing. And 12 out of 19, another supermajority vote, need to agree to issue a report based on that investigation. Sometimes grand juries will investigate, say they investigate the roads department and they've gotten a lot of complaints about shoddy work on roads or that the roads aren't being repaired. And they may spend a couple of months investigating the roads department and then realize that everything's okay with the roads department, and then they decide not to issue a report. So potentially for every report that is issued to the public about an investigation, there may have been another investigation where a report wasn't written and released to the public. So again, each investigation, each grand jury decides how best to do their investigation and how to proceed. But generally, you may have 4 or 5 investigative committees that are all responsible to a different section of county governance and that would follow through on those investigations.
Okay. So what happens if somebody you want to interview says, I don't want to, I'm not coming in?
Well, a good thing to do is to ask why, right? And to, again, to be, the golden rule of grand jury work is to be assertive, but not aggressive. So an assertive action in relationship to that is to ask why. Why are you hesitant to come in and not be interviewed? And then see what reasons there are and assure the person of confidentiality, that the grand jury is legally obligated not to reveal any information of that interview. They will not tell anybody that that particular person was interviewed. The role of confidentiality is really, really very important. And then the last resort, and it's, you can subpoena somebody to come in and testify. It's the last resort, and it's not often used by a civil grand jury, but occasionally you can ask the district attorney to subpoena somebody, to force somebody to come in and to be interviewed and to testify. But the first step is to try to find out why they won't come in for an interview, and then assure them about the issue of confidentiality to make sure that they understand nothing they say will be revealed to the public.
Okay, so you've gathered your information, you've done your research. Now what?
Now what? You make a decision, the grand jury as a whole makes a decision of whether or not to issue a report to the public regarding that particular investigation. If they've come up with some findings that suggest there are flaws in the way a particular entity manages and runs itself, and if they can make recommendations on how to fix those particular problems, and if what they're investigating is consequential, in other words, it really makes a difference to the citizens of Humboldt County, then issue a report. And that report is the only way that the grand jury can communicate with the general public and with the individuals that are most affected by that report. And hopefully the grand jury releases those reports all year long. And then at the end of the year, they release a combination of all the reports that have been released during the year. Investigations, if they're done successfully, if they find that there are things wrong that could be fixed, and if they can make recommendations on how to fix those, then a report, they write a report and they release that report, and that report is the beginning of a dialogue. In other words, the penal code requires that specific entities respond in writing to that report. So a report comes out and the Board of Supervisors are required to respond in writing to the report of whether they agree or disagree with the findings and the recommendations of the report. So that starts a dialogue. So the citizens of Humboldt County are made aware of these issues, and they're made aware of what the civil grand jury discovered, and they're made aware of whether the Board of Supervisors or another entity agrees or disagrees, and why, to the findings and the recommendations in that report.
I think you just answered that question.
Yeah.
So, do you have some examples of reports that your juries made that made a difference?
Yes, I have them right here. These are end of the year final reports. We did one report. We discovered that, again, it was initiated by a complaint, but we discovered that the county was in arrears with their ADA compliance agreement with the federal government. And we discovered that several counties in the state of California had been fined millions of dollars for similar reasons. We discovered that the Board of Supervisors and the county had not been communicating with the feds for some 8-9 years, and were behind schedule and were in danger of being fined major amounts of money by the feds. So we investigated it, we released a report, and some 2 weeks after the report was released, the Board of Supervisors began to communicate with the feds again, and I think we saved the county potentially millions of dollars of fines. So yes, sometimes you issue a report, and I might add that I believe it was the 2017, I think it's the 2018, 2019 grand jury did another report and investigation on Americans with Disability Act to follow up on that earlier report. Sometimes it takes several years of reports connected to the same issue to make a difference. There have been a lot of grand jury reports on homelessness in Humboldt County, for instance. The year that I was foreperson, or the year before that, we issued a report on homelessness, and we discovered that one of the major problems for us was that the Eureka City Council and the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors weren't communicating with each other. So we tried to focus in on how they could do a better job connecting with each other, dealing with this issue of homelessness.
Thank you. So when you and I talked before today, you mentioned that the grand jury has a unique structure, and it was based on some European model. I don't remember what that was. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, the grand jury system in the state of California has been in existence since 1850, when California became a state. And when California was divided up into the counties, it was part of the original California Constitution, the idea of the grand jury system. And the grand jury system is structured based on the idea of collegiality, that you have 19 people in a county our size, it's 19, and they all have an equal vote. They have a shared goal and a shared mission statement, and they have shared authority. It's not a hierarchical system. Most of us have lived our lives like I worked at the university, which is not a collegial system at all. It's a hierarchical system. You know who your boss is, and if you're the boss over somebody else. The grand jury system doesn't work that way. No one tells the grand jury what to do. No one tells members in the grand jury what to do. They have to volunteer to step forward to do that, based on this idea of collegiality. And when I got interested in that, I thought to myself, that's a unique structure, a non-hierarchical structure. And then I did some research and discovered that the recent European Union, the executive committee of the European Union, was formed based on the same structure. So the California grand jury collegiality system actually dates back to 1850, 1851, 1854, and the European Union Executive Committee is the most recent organization based on a similar structure. Make sense, Tuck?
It does. They must have seen our website.
Yes, they must have seen the website. Absolutely. They must have studied the California Constitution.
Exactly. So can you talk a little more about confidentiality?
Yeah, confidentiality is really, 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 really important. The people that you call in to be interviewed by the grand jury have to trust that nothing they will say will be revealed to anybody outside the grand jury. Otherwise, people are not going to come in and tell you the truth. And furthermore, confidentiality is really important among the grand jury members themselves. In Stephanie's grand jury right now, those people need to trust that everything they say is confidential. Otherwise, people like Stephanie will be less likely to tell people what they really, really believe. You're more likely to be vulnerable and share your thoughts and your feelings if you trust that nobody in that room is going to reveal anything to anybody outside that room. So confidentiality is really important for the people that you interview, so that they know that anything they say is not going to be revealed. And it's really important to the grand jury members themselves so that they're honest with each other and they trust the confidentiality among their own members. And it's for life. These grand jury members are sworn to an oath of confidentiality that lasts for their entire lives, not just for the tenure of the one-year grand jury.
That's a lot of pressure.
No.
Anything I didn't ask you that you would like us to know?
No, I think I just want to express that in terms of, I think this is great that you put this together, Tuck, and my big thing is that folks in Humboldt County volunteer for next year's grand jury. This year's grand jury term is going to be over, at the end of next June, July, and then we're going to be looking for a new group of people to volunteer to serve on a grand jury. hopefully we can increase the number of people that volunteer to serve. They might realize that it's an incredible experience. Jane has a question.
Several. What is the time commitment you're making? How often do you meet? And where do you meet? And what do you do now? Are you on Zoom?
Well,
How is it actually functioning?
okay, I will let the current grand jury members, when they speak, talk about how they're functioning right now. When I was on, when we were able to meet in person, we met in person, we met at the courthouse. I'm assuming Tuck is in the cave, which is on the 3rd floor of the courthouse, which was one of the rooms that we used. I think currently the grand jury may have been moved to the Veterans Building, but you can talk about that. And remember, Jane, that each grand jury decides on its own when they meet. So they decide. It's really important, this idea of that each grand jury is autonomous from the previous grand jury. Now, it's true that when I was on the grand jury, the previous grand juries met on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, every week on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Why? Because they didn't want to meet on Monday so they could have a 3-day weekend. They didn't want to meet on Friday because they wanted a 4-day weekend. So Tuesdays and Wednesdays came to us and we thought, hey, they got this already worked out, so let's continue to meet on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And they meet for approximately 6 hours a week. But Stephanie can talk to that in terms of what they're doing now.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So we do meet 6 hours a week officially. On Tuesdays, we have committee meetings. And we're each on 2 committees and they each meet 1.5 hours. And then on Wednesdays, we meet for 3 hours as a plenary, which is the entire grand jury. And Melissa Morrison was just asking everybody, are there term limits? So I'm not sure if you mean, are there limits to the term that we're doing? We have this particular grand jury is on a 15-month commitment because we started late. It was because of COVID, but most grand juries are a 12-month commitment. And when you say, are there term limits? I know there are several people who have served multiple terms on the grand jury, and perhaps John could speak to that a little bit more, but I don't know that there's specifically a limit after your second term.
There's the penal code. The penal code allows a judge. The penal code allows for a certain number of people to serve a second term.
And then some have served even longer, right? I mean,
Well, you can't serve any more than according to the penal code, you can't serve any more than 3 years in a row. And according to the penal code, I think you can only have 7 holdovers that serve a second year. Now, oftentimes, one of the things that's interesting in terms of being all over the state of California is that a lot of the counties do things differently. And a lot of the judges do things that are not totally in sync with the penal code. But who's going to question what a judge says you can and cannot do?
right. And Melissa, if we have not answered your question, will you please respond with another question? I hope that answered what you were trying to get at.
Jane.
So
So-
when you are wanting to gather information, is it mainly through interviews or you go and dig through the archives? What kind of research do you actually do? And I presume you bring people into the chamber to interview them. How does that work and how do they get time off?
You do both. You oftentimes you go out and you interview somebody on site. Interviews need to have at least 2 people on the grand jury. There's a penal code rule of 2s. So any public action needs to be done by at least 2 members of the grand jury. So if an interview, and most often interviews are done by at least 4 people, So quite often 4 people will go out and interview somebody on site. Then there's observations where you go out on site and you watch the way a process is done. You might go inspect equipment. You might go and see how the volunteer fire people are trained, so that the second category is observations. And then you do a lot of research. You ask to look at a lot of documents, you read a lot of documents. So the investigation is divided up between research, observation, and interviews. And the interviews are both on-site interviews, and you can request somebody come to the grand jury for an interview. It just depends on the nature of the interview.
Do you have staff support of any kind, or are you your own writers and your own recorders?
Would you
Do you record these interviews ever?
Yeah, well, again, Stephanie can talk. The years that I was on the grand jury, we tended not to record interviews. We took notes. If you record an interview, you have to get permission from the person that you're interviewing to record it. And sometimes recording an interview puts somebody on edge, and oftentimes it's easier to take notes. But Stephanie and Vicky, Vicky, you're on the current grand jury too?
And
Stephanie and Vicky can talk about what's happening now.
so I'd be glad to, Vicky, unless you want to jump in here. I don't see.
You go for it.
Okay, so basically for our grand jury, and we've been in session since March, we have completely relied on Zoom this entire time. We have never met in person. And I have to say, every interview we have had a few interviews. You know how COVID, there was a point where there was an opportunity to meet in person. So there were a few interviews that were conducted in person, but for the most part, interviews have been conducted by Zoom. And people have been extremely open to being recorded. It's actually really helpful because you can go back as a group later as you're pulling your research together and getting ready to write your reports. You have that then as an archival opportunity to refer back to. So we found it very beneficial.
And I presume you erase all that, or what do you do with your records, your notes? And
At
things
the
like
end of
that?
the year, it's gone. We cannot pass on what we have. Oh, go ahead. Oh, John, yes.
Yeah, you can, the grand jury can, again, by supermajority vote, a lot of this is covered by the penal code in terms of what a grand jury can and cannot do. And in the penal code, it says by supermajority vote, in other words, 12 out of the 19 people have to agree, they can pass on a file to next year's grand jury and ask them to look into that.
But they don't have to.
They don't have to. That's right. Very good, Stephanie. You remember that. Next year's grand jury does not have to, is in no way obligated to look into that. But if a file is not passed on, then yes, all the material is destroyed at the end of the year.
Okay.
And Melissa was asking, Melissa had a follow-up question on her term limits. And the question is, so someone could serve 7 years, and I believe that's a follow-up to something John might have talked about.
No, 3 consecutive years is what he said.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so I'm not sure where the 7 years came from, Melissa, but it sounds like 3 consecutive years. And then, but you could potentially, let's say it wasn't consecutive, you could then perhaps join again.
There are one. I mean, this is a it's a strange paradox. For instance, I have over the last 6 years gone down and trained Mendocino County's grand jury each year, and I go up to Siskiyou County, train that grand jury, and have done so for the last 5 years. And both of those counties, for instance, both Mendocino and Siskiyou counties have people that are on the grand jury that make grand jury service a lifelong thing. They have served on 8, 9, 10 grand juries, but you can't serve any more than 3 years in a row. So the judge asks them to skip a year. But in if you go down to Mendocino County and talk to their grand jury, you'll find members that have been on the grand jury for 8, 9 times. Same thing up in Siskiyou County. That's not so true in terms of Humboldt County.
And we'd like to encourage more people to be involved versus the
Yes.
same people.
We're trying to encourage new people,
Exactly.
not have people repeat 7 or 8 times.
Yeah. And then Peter is asking what the median age of the average grand jury member is. I'm just going to
Sure.
say, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead. Peter, you can imagine, since they meet Tuesday and Wednesday mornings from 9 to 12, that Stephanie is the exception.
I'm retired.
Yes, but she's still the exception to the rule. And the 2 years that I was on the grand jury, I think the average age was like 68 years old. We had one remarkable gentleman on the grand jury who was 90 years old, who was a wonderful soul, sharp as a tack, and was made incredible contributions to the grand jury. But you can imagine that the average age of the grand jury is up there, and that's a particular problem.
Yeah.
Because you have a generational issue. You've got all these elders looking at these situations. So we're grateful for people like Stephanie when they come along and serve on the grand jury.
I'm sorry, I'm retired, man. I'm going to say, we're looking for people who are younger. We would like to find a way to encourage people. We don't want it to be a class or an age kind of situation. So we're open to all of that.
Yeah.
So I would just like to add, we have one grand juror that is probably in her 40s.
Yeah.
It is delightful.
It is.
Just delightful.
Yes.
We've also had 3 or 4 others that just couldn't fit it into their time frame and dropped out.
Because of work.
Speaking of which, Stephanie, Vicky, are you up to your full 19 right now?
We are?
Very good.
As
Yes.
far as we know,
Yes.
somebody just left and they were going to swear in an alternate today, I think.
Very good.
So I want to sort of follow through with with the questions we had for the grand jury. So one of the questions was, why did you choose to participate on the civil grand jury? Vicky?
Oh, okay. Well, when I retired, of course, I was looking for something to do, and I had always wanted to be on the grand jury. I grew up here and I was aware of the grand jury, and I had seen reports from the grand jury, but I had never had time. So I somehow I found that you could apply at the grand jury office. So I went to I found the room, and paper clipped to the door is an application to be on the grand jury. So I filled it out and mailed it in, and then I was picked. So that is my experience with the grand jury.
Steffi?
So mine's a little different. I really had known nothing about our grand jury process at all. I had no idea how grand jury members were invited to participate, and I had just retired prior to COVID. And that early spring, I opened my mail and I had received an invitation, a letter, along with an application suggesting I look into applying to be on the grand jury. And when I retired, I was really looking for ways I could go back and volunteer. That was something that was huge in my life before I was working up here. And I kind of was stymied because of COVID. And so I saw this as an opportunity to do what I wanted to do and make a difference.
And my experience was similar to Stephanie's. I decided I wanted to give back to Humboldt County. So I was interested in the Trinidad Land Trust. I was interested in being a docent for some of the beach walks. I was interested in doing stream rehabilitation. And then I saw an ad in the North Coast Journal asking for applications. And not even knowing what the grand jury was, it just sort of caught my eye. So I inquired, thought I might find it interesting, and was accepted. But we'll continue with the questions. So what about being on the grand jury keeps you interested and engaged in the process?
Well, I'll take that one first. For one thing, I feel like I read the newspaper differently now than I did before I was on the grand jury, because there are many, many articles that I go, is that something we may want to discuss? Is that or is that something we're already discussing? And so I read the newspaper in a different way, and I feel that I am much more connected to what's going on. And I feel that I pay more attention. And something else that is interesting to me is I now in the lobby of the courthouse. So this we will discuss when we get more to technology. I do not have a printer at home. So I go to the grand jury office to print things. I can copy, but I am not able to print. So when I go, there's a Southern Humboldt newspaper called The Independent.
Yeah.
And I pick it up now once a week when I'm in the office, because Southern Humboldt has a completely different slant on the news than the Times Standard does. And the the Mad River Union also has a completely different slant on the news. So I find it interesting now to see different perspectives in the county, which I do not know that I was aware that the perspectives were so very different as they are.
Steph?
Stephanie?
I agree with Vicki 100%. And I'll add to that. What keeps me interested is how much I'm learning about how our local government works. I keep learning more every day. And the grand jury process itself really plays to my interests. I enjoy researching and investigating and being on teams. And so all of that is just like a natural kind of fit for me. I think Jane had a question.
Yeah, Jane?
How do you actually work when you work on teams? Are you going out generally together? Do you make assignments to each other, just discuss what you want to do, and then some of you each work independently doing your research? How does that actually function day to day? Because I suspect you're spending more than 6 hours a week. That's the 6 hours a week you're spending together. What about the additional time?
You're so right, Jane. And I'm not sure if Tuck wants to answer first. What about being on the grand jury keeps him interested and engaged? And then we go to that question, because I know that is a question further on what a typical week looks like.
Yeah.
Yes, so we're actually going to get to that question, Jane. So,
Okay.
Real quickly, I had no interest whatsoever in county politics all of my life. And I'm now fascinated by it. It's sort of like Humboldt County is in the Wild West of California. It just seems like there's a lot of stuff going on. But also I really enjoy the people that I'm working with. They're solid people. We don't always disagree, but we end up coming to a reasonable or a congenial decision on things. So, and I'm personally afraid of letting my teammates down. So I stay just barely ahead of the 8 ball. So next question is, what challenges has operating as a grand jury during a pandemic presented?
Well, we pretty much do everything on Zoom. There are a few meetings that people will have in person. And as has been mentioned, we may start meeting at the Veterans Memorial, possibly in October. We don't know. It just depends. One of the committees that investigates facilities actually is able to go out and look at facilities. But for the most part, we work on Zoom. We communicate on Zoom. We do research mostly on the computer. I mean, there are so many things that are available by doing research. So I have learned how to do research that I did not know how to do before. That is new to me. People within the committees will communicate, they will talk, but it feels to me that it's important that the committee work as a whole, and you don't want to have too many meetings that don't involve the whole committee, because then you could possibly decide you want to move the committee in a different direction, or you just want to make sure you're sharing information so that any decision that's made is a true group decision and everyone has access to the same information as everyone else. So Stephanie, you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, and again, I'm just going to build off of what Vicki said, because that was absolutely valid. And I'm going to say, because we've conducted all of our meetings, all of our real meetings have been for the entire 6 months over Zoom, I was actually kind of impressed with how well it does work. The biggest challenge, I'll say, for me has been sometimes when you're in person, it's a lot easier to read people. And for me especially, I feel like when you're on Zoom, sometimes you miss little things, like sometimes people have different senses of humor. And I've been caught kind of thinking somebody's sense of humor was actually a serious comment. And so I'll say,
Sorry.
No, not you, not you. I just feel like it's easier when you're in person sometimes to get to know people. And so we've been together for 6 months, but it doesn't really feel maybe quite as bonded as it would have been if we had been able to meet in person. I think you read people better when you're in person, a lot faster, but it is a really congenial group. I just think that's one of the maybe the challenges of meeting on Zoom.
Yeah, also the Zoom meetings themselves are potential problems. We've had witnesses that we couldn't understand.
We've had witnesses wearing masks while they're talking to us.
So, and also, you want to look somebody in the eye when they're talking to you, and it's really hard to do on Zoom. As Stephanie said, to get a feel of whether they're being completely forthright or not. So let's see. So how important is it to have computer skills? Does not being technologically savvy rule you out?
Can I start this one? I'm just gonna say, I came into this process with zero background in Google Docs and minimal Zoom expertise. So I'm just going to say, I feel that for every one of us who is technologically really struggling, there are at least 2 to 3 people on the entire grand jury who are willing to not only help you walk through any concerns you have or any issues you have, but when Google Docs isn't cooperating with you, there are people who are willing to actually figure it out for you. So I would not let technology or your fear that you are not technologically savvy deter you from being on the grand jury.
And I would say anyone that can Zoom can be on the grand jury.
Yeah.
So
And you'll learn a lot of new skills, right?
yes, but so first of all, you really have to have a computer. I mean, if you're going to talk about technology and people that don't know technology or are not sure, because if you don't have a computer, it's, especially because we're on Zoom, it's going to be very difficult to participate. Now, there is a computer in the grand jury office, and there is a computer in the room where Tuck is, but you would have to come down every meeting. You'd have to come down to the county courthouse because you cannot, because of confidentiality, you cannot go to the public library. You cannot go someplace where you could rent a computer and use it. So you would have to have that. And then you would have to have the amount of juice, whatever one calls it, so that you could actually be involved in a Zoom meeting. And again, so you can't take a laptop and plug it in to a place at a coffee shop and be on a Zoom meeting. So you have to have privacy and you have to have juice. And the rest of it, I would say I am very much like Stephanie. There are a lot of things I did not know. I had a business and we definitely used technology and the computer, but I had wonderful part-time employees that went to Humboldt State and they pretty much did whatever needed to be done and then showed me just what I needed to know. And one of my employees actually said, and we joke about it a lot, she said, "Oh, Vicki, it's painful to watch you type. I can't bear it. Let me type for you." So I would say my typing's gotten a little faster since then. I thought I would at some point show her how I can actually use two hands. But I would say, like, to add on to what Stephanie said, people on the grand jury that know more are so willing to share and help the rest of us out. But I would say, you know, they have a vested interest in it because the more that we can do, the less they have to do. So I think they're very happy to share with us. But I would say it has been a learning experience in many ways, but learning about how to do certain technologies has been a revelation to me. For instance, I learned how to share a screen. I had no idea how to do that. I thought you had to have two computers to do it. So I was very proud of myself to be able to, in a meeting, share a screen with the rest of the group.
So what advice would you offer someone considering a term of grand jury service?
Do it.
Yeah, me, I'd say go for it. As John had said, I think you will feel that it will change your life in a good way.
And I'd say, you know, for us, it's a 15-month commitment. For most juries, it's a 12-month commitment. And it is very much of an investment. I would say that, though, you're going to find that it really is a valuable experience, especially if you're one of those people who's willing to take an investigation and you're willing to look at it as a puzzle and understand that an investigation that you thought was going one direction could go a different direction. And you're flexible enough to allow yourself to follow wherever that investigation is leading you. If you have that kind of ability and it's not a challenge for you to do that, I think you're going to get a lot out of it. You'll really find it a valuable experience.
And then Tuck, could I speak again? Is that
Yes.
all right to speak twice? Okay. So one of the things you may notice how we're raising our hands. That's one of the things we do in the meeting is you have to raise your hand before you speak. That may be Zoom protocol through other meetings. the grand jury Zoom meetings are about the only group meetings that I actually attend. I played softball when I was younger, and I run across women that I played softball with, and it's been years, and yet we feel like we have a common bond. My feeling about the grand jury is I will see Stephanie or Tuck 10 years from now, and we will have this bond that because we have spent this time together and gotten to know each other. And I just feel like we will have that forever. And that's to me, that's part of the grand jury experience.
Absolutely.
So Jane, here's your question that you asked. So describe a typical week of civil grand jury work.
Okay, so I am a co-chair along with Tuck on a subcommittee. And so in a typical week, Tuck and I will prepare an agenda, and I will facilitate that subcommittee meeting, and then I'll write up minutes for the committee. And then at the plenary meeting, which is the meeting of the entire grand jury the next day, I'll provide a report out so people will know our progress. And then as a committee over that week, we will all participate in research on the topic that we're investigating. We will prepare for interviews. We'll work together on interview questions, and then we will actually participate in interviews. So that is a typical week for me.
Vicki?
Well, I would say there, as Stephanie said, and has been talked about, so we meet Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and usually in the committee meetings, we decide on assignments that we volunteer to either develop questions, do research, look at reports, write little memos about previous interviews or research that we have done, so people don't have to read the entire document. If they don't want to, they can read an outline. So there is work outside of the committee meetings, but it is, and I would say it's, to me, maybe it depends. Some weeks there's very little to do. Sometimes it might be 10 to 15 hours a week that I will be just doing research on or reviewing to make sure I understand where we have gone and where we're going. And then other weeks there's not that much to do. So it just really depends.
I'd say it's an average of maybe 15 to 30. I mean, depending on what your role is on a committee, it could be up to 30 hours a week.
It could be. Yeah, I would say 30 hours a week is not often, but it can happen.
Mhm.
So one week I conducted an interview, and I realized I spent a lot of time making sure I could say the questions.
Right.
We had decided on the questions, but I
Preparing.
stumbled. I would stumble over certain words. So it's like, okay, that word is not going to be in that question.
Yeah, so you
What's another word
prepare.
I can use? It's some of it is that kind of homework.
Mhm. Did that answer your question, Jane, or did you have more? We
You
can't hear you.
muted.
Yes, it does. That's very helpful because when you're considering volunteering, you have to have an idea of the scope of what's engaged. And that's probably why you lose some people who are actively employed, because if it's suddenly 30 hours a week, even if it's only periodic, that can cause a problem. The other question I have is your scope of work limited just to county issues, or can you deal with the Eureka, Fortuna, Arcata governments?
John, go ahead.
Well, the penal code says that the civil grand jury has to look into one aspect of county government each year and issue a report. That's mandated. After that mandate, the grand jury can look into any aspect of county government, including Arcata City Council, Eureka City Council, Eureka committees, special districts, McKinleyville Special District. They can look into that. They can look into any aspect of government that exists within the county, not just county government, but any aspect of government that exists within the county, including things like LAFCO, charter schools, boards of education, all kinds of advisory committees, all existing under the purview of the grand jury.
So how many hundreds of thousands of dollars do you rake in over the course of a year?
Oh, let me answer that. Not much. So first of all, I did not realize that there was any compensation at all being involved with the grand jury. And there is a small amount. And perhaps it seems to me that it is, well, John can maybe give you more the specifics, but and mileage when there are meetings in person, we are given mileage, and for whenever there are visits to places and interviews where we travel rather than do them by Zoom, we are given mileage. But our pay, as I said, is not much. And so the story I wanted to tell is my husband is a retired musician, and one day, which was the day that I got my paycheck from the county, that day he played, because he is a musician also, he played at a restaurant for brunch, and then he played at a wedding that evening, and his pay was more than my pay. So our joke was I should quit my day job and pick up a tambourine and start accompanying my husband on his musical gigs if I wanted to be a bread earner in the family. But that's just our family joke. So
So
story of compensation.
Right. So the compensation is $20 a day for each of the 2 days a week that you're in meetings. So it's definitely volunteer work with a very small stipend. It's not something you'd get into for the pay. I think one of the rewards you'll see is the awareness and conversations. And John covered this at the very beginning, and I love that he covered this. And I feel like we're bookending it now, but it's the awareness and conversations you're going to be generating in the community when you provide your reports. That's one big reward. A second is that, again, something John mentioned, that the officials you're talking about in your reports are going to have to respond to your findings. And then third, and most important for me, is just remembering the goal is to help our local governments be more efficient and effective in supporting our communities. And that's the takeaway I have, that is what really is keeping me going, that I'm a part of that.
Thank you. So I'm going to take us quickly to the website. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Yep.
So, sorry, if you Google Humboldt County Grand Jury, you'll get to this page. And it looks like you're not on that page, but Humboldt County web pages are tricky in that after you do that, you have to just scroll down a little bit. So this is our beautiful web page. Just leaps out and grabs you, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a list of grand jurors. Again, you have to scroll down to find them. And this is not current. This is how we started in March. The thing I would like you guys to recognize are the grand jury forms. So if you'd like to, if you're interested in becoming a grand juror, obviously it's the application, but there's also a citizen complaint form. And you can click on that. And I believe you can just submit it when you're done. Is that?
Yes.
So that's how you file a grand jury complaint. And again, it's right on Humboldt County's website, and that email address is going to be at the end of our presentation here. Any questions on this? I wouldn't think so.
Chuck, why don't you show them? Can you show them the application? Oh, you've got the movie. Never mind. The video. Never mind.
I can show. Yeah, I can show the application if you want. Let's see, forms. So it's shorter than it looks.
If I could just add one thing in terms of compensation, when you're serving on a civil grand jury, you are exempt from any criminal juries. So you, because I was called for the regular jury duty when I was on the grand jury, and there's a place on there where it says, I am serving on a civil grand jury, and you are immediately excused.
All right, so this is the award-winning video I promised you here. Are you able to hear this?
No sound.
Okay. They told me how to fix that.
There it is.
No, that's not it.
Well, it's go click play. Tuck.
No comment on the accusation filed by the county grand jury.
The grand jury did an excellent investigation.
Is it true that if upheld, the official would be removed from office?
The official would be removed.
Got it?
I'm on that grand jury. While filing an accusation against a public official is our county grand jury's strongest tool, most of our work is done reviewing local government activities.
We all know that California is a special place. One of the qualities adding to the uniqueness of our state is its citizens' ability to participate directly in their own governance.
Every year in California's 58 counties, a full-time grand jury is seated. Although this regular grand jury is empowered to hand down criminal indictments, in many counties that is handled by a special jury called for that single purpose. Unlike a trial jury or a criminal grand jury, this regular grand jury will serve for a full year. The jurors receive a small stipend and mileage reimbursement. It's a big commitment, but very rewarding. It's important work.
Grand jury findings and recommendations must be answered in writing. This process holds local public officials accountable. I like the fact that the grand jury is made up of ordinary citizens who have chosen to become extraordinary. Grand jury service is one of the Superior Court's highest honors. It's been said that the grand jury is the citizens' watchdog over local government.
While filing a formal accusation against a public official is based on major faults in conduct, most grand jury work is done by committees investigating citizen complaints or conducting local government oversight. One mandated task is the annual inspection of all jails and prisons in the county. When an investigation is complete, a report may be issued with constructive findings and recommendations. These reports, along with the official responses, are made public. Building awareness and focusing public opinion is the ultimate power of our civil grand jury system. All who serve on the civil grand jury take away different impressions and lessons from their year of service. I feel like a productive citizen.
I made a lot of good friends. It's the most interesting experience of your life. Direct benefits come to mind when I look back on my grand
service. The educational value is immeasurable. Like most people, I didn't know much about how local government works. Gandhi once said, "You must become the change you wish to see." I would serve again in a heartbeat.
All of us from time to time see something we wish we could change. Serving on your county's grand jury is a chance to put that desire into action, to be an agent of change.
Together, we can make a difference. It's paying back. It's paying forward.
Seek out and read your grand jury's final reports, as well as the official responses to the jury's recommendations. More information is available at your jury services office, your local grand jury, or at www.cgja.org. The California Grand Jurors Association, an all-volunteer group, is dedicated to protecting, preserving, and assisting county grand juries.
Help us help you. Participate as a grand juror. Support this great system.
All right.
So
There was,
Someone had a question.
Melissa has a question about who picks the grand jury members.
the most situations are like the following, although it varies from county to county. There's a pool of qualified people. There's a screening process. The names are put in a hat, and then the judge pulls out 19 people. Now, that's a little different from county to county. For instance, if there are existing grand jury people that want to serve a second year, they can indicate they want to serve again to the judge. The presiding judge can make the decision that yes, they will be on next year's grand jury. So for instance, out of 19 slots, if you have 5 holdovers that want to serve again, the judge can make that decision, and then 14 names are pulled out of a hat. Now, there was a reference earlier, Vicki talked about the southern part of the state, Garberville, Shelter Cove, or over to Willow Creek. If you have someone who is volunteering to be on the grand jury from Willow Creek, that person may be given preference because they represent an underrepresented section of the county. And if they're willing, when we met in person, if they're willing to drive over from Willow Creek to be on the grand jury, then the judge can give that person preference based on the fact that they represent an underrepresented section of the county. But the judge chooses it, and the idea basically is that there is some random selection out of the people that have volunteered to be on the grand jury.
We're pretty much done. Are there any other questions?
Bert has a question. Bert Taylor?
Go ahead, Bert.
Yes. Given that each new grand jury makes its own rules, what kind of help is there for them to get started? Is there anything like a training period or a retreat or something for a new group?
Yeah, the penal code requires that each grand jury receive training, and the California Grand Jurors Association, which is an organization of former grand jury members, provides that training currently to all of the counties in California, except for one, I believe. And so, yes, each grand jury gets several days of training. There are also report writing workshops. There are also 4-person and pro tem workshops. So each grand jury receives comprehensive training on what it means to be on the grand jury.
Thank you.
And Melissa Morrison had a question about how grand jury members are selected? Is it a balance between male and female, or is there any kind of other diversity kind of?
I think again, that's up to the purview of the individual Superior Court presiding judge. The idea is that there's a random selection from the group of people that have been deemed qualified to serve on the grand jury. But sometimes there is preference given to grand jury members that represent underrepresented populations, whether that's geographically, whether that's gender, or whether that's ethnically.
Are there any more questions? If not, I want to thank you all for your presentation. It was excellent, beautifully done. Glad to have so many of you here with diverse opinions and diverse periods on it. And John, that's great that you do that training because it gives a wonderful perspective. And aside from thanking you, I want to let you know that on September 20th, which is next Monday, we have a presentation by Alderon Laird, familiar to probably most of you, on sea level rise. It's a public forum, and it's going to be a discussion by Caltrans District 1 representative. That should be very interesting. Maybe we'll find out what on earth is going on with our overpass, underpass, throughpass, whatever it's going to be. Look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again to all of you who came and presented. Great job.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, Melissa.